Welcome to another curation session. Today I'm going to go through the NFDI4Chem ontology list, which includes some non-life sciences ontologies related to the chemical sciences, like catalysis and engineering. They've organized this list together on this website. So what I want to do is find which ontologies are in this list that are sufficient in quality and metadata availability, and ones that aren't in the bioregistry, and see if I can add them. And I'm going to walk you through doing that. So I've already got the tab open following this link. So here's our page, and if we scroll down, we can actually find the list. So I think I'm just going to go from the top and already look through these things. So let's start by opening two tabs side by side, changing the size of this to make it a little bit easier to read. And yeah, so the first one's the Allotrope Foundation ontologies. So let's check if that's available in Bioregistry. Okay, it is, the Allotrope Merged Suite. So I'm not going to go through what each of these ontologies are if they're already in Bioregistry, so we can kind of just move on. The next one's the basic formal ontology, and this one is a classic. It's the upper level ontology for most of the, actually all of the open biomedical ontologies, like OBO Foundry ontologies. So this one's already in the Bioregistry for sure. The next one, CAO, I don't think is in the Bioregistry. There's nothing like this. It's called the Chemical Analysis Ontology. And so what this says is it's organized using BFO framework with entries primarily under concepts for material entities, information content entities, and processes. Currently, the ontology is more of a vocabulary that depends on the predicate. It's more of a vocabulary in that development of predicates that relates to subjects and has not been a focal point. So that's interesting. So it's using the BFO as a top level ontology. Maybe we can look into this. So it looks like we've already got a link to the ontology file, and we can take a look at this. So Chemical Analysis Metadata Platform version 2.0. This is interesting, right? So it's got a different name inside the ontology from what's written there. However, the URLs I can see, they sort of have this kind of style. So this is really interesting, right? This double prefix thingy is called the banana. So this is completely unnecessary to have CAO again, because you already know based on this URI that this is inside the CEO namespace. So okay, this is interesting. So it's got some information here. It's got, yeah, the champ. So this seems to be the name of the project is champ, and the ontology they want to call CAO. So this is a good candidate for adding to the bioregistry. Maybe we want to do a little bit of looking into the vocabulary itself and see if there's anything really useful. So I'm going to try downloading this directly, and I'll open it with Protégé. Okay, Protégé is not so nice with opening up new files, so maybe we have to go through the downloads. Okay. Skip that. Okay, so we've got lots of information. We have some information about the creators. We've got licensing. So the metadata is actually filled out really nicely here. So let's take a look in the entities and see if we can find something. So concept, continuant, equivalent things, occurrent. So this is interesting. You can see it's using like a very old version of BFO and not a more recent one with OBO pearls. But it's not the job of the bioregistry to make judgment calls on the content of the ontologies. So we can see that there are identifiers that are popping up. And so, yeah, we can say that this is a vocabulary that's probably worth including in the bioregistry because people would want to make some resolutions on that. So how do we go about doing this? I'm going to hop into PyCharm, where I've already got my project locally opened up for the bioregistry, and I'm going to directly edit the JSON file. So we can just maybe start at the top. This ontology is going to be CAO for the prefix. It's not super great to actually use three-letter names for prefixes, so I may change this to something other than what they've called it. And that's okay. The bioregistry can have its own prefixes for things because there's no like absolute truth outside of the bioregistry. So we can kind of go back and change that later because having short prefixes just creates the possibility for conflict. But anyway, we can start filling in some metadata. So we've got the name of the ontology, and so we can copy paste that, the chemical analysis ontology. We've got a license for the ontology. And by the way, like bioregistry pages, even though we're talking about an ontology, it doesn't have to be ontologies. It can be any databases, controlled vocabularies that have their own identifiers attached to them. So it's a CC by 3.0. And I'm writing this with the SPDX identifier. So we've got a description. So I'm actually going to just borrow the description directly from the ontology, and I'll make a little note that I copied it. So we need a home page, so hopefully there's some kind of external information. I'm going to hop back here, and it does look like there's a website available. It looks like, so I can see from the bottom left of the screen that there's maybe a typo in this. It seems to go and point to the SBO, so that's not acceptable, right? We need to find a real website to go with this. So maybe a Champs project is good enough. Let's see what that website looks like. Okay, this is probably good enough. It gives some information about the ontology and links to various artifacts on it. So if someone who wants to know more about it might want to start here. So that's a good homepage. What else do we need to make a good bioregistry page? Well, the next thing is we want to give an example identifier. So here's an example identifier, just borrowed from the top of this. Or we can go back to Protégé and look for one, maybe like a more interesting concept. So let's say like an analyte. Yeah, that seems like an important concept for a chemical methods ontology. So, they're making this mistake with the bananas, and so in the bioregistry, we want to deduplicate those. So the ID for this is going to just be the numbers. And so we can put example, and we'll put an example identifier. And then we can also write what the URI format string is. And the URI format string is the rest of one of these identifiers. So we're going to take everything except for the local unique identifier, and then in the place of the local unique identifier, put a placeholder, which is going to be this $1. And we sort of inherited this way of writing out placeholders from Wikidata and other places that use something similar to this. Okay, so we've got the name, we've got a description, the home page, an example, the URI format. We can also go as far as to say what the pattern is. So local unique identifiers appear to be strings that have all digits inside them. So we can write that with the hat for the open, and then //d corresponds to digits. And we can have any number of those. I think maybe there's some limits on it, but for now we'll just go simple. And then we put the $sign to be the end of the regular expression. Fix that typo. Another thing that we need to do is when we create one of these new prefix requests, we want to put some contributor information. So I'm going to have to put my own contact information here. So let's copy paste that from somewhere else. And this field for the contributor has my email address, it has my GitHub handle, it has my full name, and my ORCID ID. So anytime somebody sees this record, they can get in touch with me and ask, hey, why did you make these choices? What's going on with this sort of banana thing? Some people might be interested in that. Okay, so besides the contributor, it's also useful to have a contact person. And luckily we saw inside the Protégé, which I'm going to hop back to now, in the ontology, we saw that there's two people, Stuart Chalk and Anthony Williams, who are both relevant in this. So I've heard these names in the chemical space before, and so as a curator, maybe I'll just pick one of them. It seems like let's pick Anthony Williams since he comes first in the list. So let's go to ORCID and let's try and find the ORCID identifier for this person. So yeah, Anthony Williams is involved in a lot of this governmental work, and so he's also been on Chem Connector on Twitter, I think. So this is the right ORCID ID, so we can copy that, and we can come back in here and we can add the ORCID ID for the contact person for this ontology. Of course, we also want to add the name, so let me copy that as well. Sometimes you're even able to find, publicly, like the email address for the person. So this is actually pretty useful. So I'm going to add this publicly available email address. And then we can also try going on GitHub and searching for this person. And if we find a GitHub tag, this is quite useful as well. Because when we talk about this request on GitHub, we might want to tag them and have them get added. So this is someone that comes up for Anthony Williams. I'm pretty sure this is not the right person. This is a person who's in Seattle, and they don't seem to be talking about chemistry. So maybe we don't find a GitHub tag for this person. So let's give it a little bit more of a look. Okay, that seems to be good. The next step is I've written up all of this as a contribution now, and so I'm going to go into my GitHub desktop, and I can see the diff. First thing I'm going to do is make a new branch. So add NFDI4Chem prefixes. So I'm going to make a new branch, and I'm already going to make a commit. So the next step I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up my terminal, and you can sort of disregard this other stuff that's in there. So one thing is the Bioregistry has a very canonical formatting for the JSON file, and I've got a script that automatically reformats it for me. So I'm going to run this Bioregistry lint, and it's going to update this JSON file. And while it's doing this, it might find some typos. Like, for example, I forget commas inside the JSON files quite a bit. All right, so it seems like nothing bad happened. So we're going to go back here and see that the file got reformatted, put it into a canonical order. So let's find CAO again and see now it's sort of sorted everything alphabetically. This is good. It reduces the diff incredibly to make sure that there's a canonical order. So let's get rid of those trailing slashes. Yeah, so I can make another commit now. Because the Bioregistry uses squash and merge, it doesn't matter if we make tons and tons of commits, because they're all going to get grouped together into a logical thing. So this means that we don't have to worry so much about making little commits that just have tiny changes in them. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to run the Bioregistry web app locally, and I'm going to check out what this page actually looks like when I open it up in the browser. And maybe it'll remind me that I actually forgot some fields. So there's a couple updates to the Bioregistry that make it a little bit slower to start recently, but it's no big deal because once it's open, we should be all good. Okay, so in the meantime, why don't we kind of go back to this thing. Let's see if we can actually find a link to this person's GitHub. No. Okay, couldn't find it. So let's see if there's any other metadata that's useful that we can grab from here. Oh, yeah, so we can add some keywords. So look at that, we can just borrow these keywords. Keywords are not from a controlled vocabulary, they're sort of however you want, free text. So we can add those as well. Let's hope the Bioregistry is running. Good. All right, so here's what the page is going to look like when it gets to the website. We've got a nice description that's giving some context for people. This part of the description is actually not that useful. It's sort of redundant, a structured field, so I'm going to delete that. We've got sort of some information about the contact person. We've got a link to the home page. We have our example local unique identifier. We've got an example query auto-generated from the combination of the prefix and the local unique identifier. We've got contributor information from me. And then we've got sort of a list of possible provider examples based on the example local unique identifier. So here's the one that kind of comes from the RDF, and then here's the one that you can use in the Bioregistry. So one thing that you have to keep in mind is that you can have URIs that don't actually resolve. And I'm going to guess that these URIs don't resolve to anything yet. So you can use it to get to the ontology. Maybe not. Oh, images ontology. That's like a very strange setup. Let me double check that one more time. So yeah, it appears that the URIs inside the ontology have kind of this weird address where it's like images inside it. So yeah, these URIs don't actually resolve to anything. Now that happens in ontologies. It's not ideal. But this page is looking pretty good besides making a kind of minor update. So I'm going to come back to the bioregistry. Excuse me. Delete that sentence we don't need. Yeah, we're kind of good to go for this one. So I'll make first of all, I'll run lint one more time because I added the keywords and it's in the wrong place. You know what, there's actually one other update I can make. So when writing a description, it's sort of redundant to start the sentence in the description with the name of the ontology and also including its prefix. So we can just cut this sentence up a little bit and just start with like an ontology developed as blah, blah, blah. And so this is fine because, you know, it doesn't have to be a full sentence here. This is just like a short description text. There's some ontologies that have much longer, or some entries in the bioregistry that have much longer description text. But, you know, this is good enough. This is helpful for people if they find it. So let's make sure that this loads properly. Yep, here we go. And you can see that the linting also lowercase the keywords just to canonicalize them a little bit. All right. So I'm gonna publish this branch now. It sort of is arbitrary if you publish it when you start or after you've made a couple commits. And now GitHub Desktop is gonna bring me to making a pull request, so I can already start doing this. So I don't think I'm gonna do all of the possible things inside this list during this video because it might take a while. But we can already get started, and so we can add our NFDI prefixes. So yeah, we've got a couple other things to do. I'm going to leave this as a draft. Maybe we'll go and do one more, and then I'll stop this video. So once I make a pull request on Bioregistry, it's going to run a set of... Oh, okay. So it's not going to do anything until I press ready for review. So I'm going to press ready for review just for demonstrations purposes, but we've got a whole set of continuous integration tests. So make sure, first of all, like that the code from the bioregistry and the documentation builds. And so that's sort of irrelevant for us right now since we're just making data updates. But it also runs a bunch of tests on the data integrity, and it'll find issues like if you make typos or if you don't follow certain standards or guidelines, and then it like gives some feedback on that. So we're going to hope that the things that we did were already correct, but if not, we're going to get some test failures, and then we can go through and look at the details of those tests to find the different pieces of information it has to say about how to fix what we did wrong. So while that's going in the background, we can kind of jump back to the original page. So we managed to get to the third item in the list. That's pretty good. So I think we can just go down. I'm going to delete some of these other pieces of information. So we did AFO, BFO, we added CAO. Now we're going to kind of keep scrolling. So the next one's KB. This one's definitely in the bioregistry already. ChemInf, this one's also in the bioregistry already. CHMO is in the bioregistry already. So these are all OBO Foundry ontologies. So of course they've made it to the bioregistry. The next ones I think are going to be kind of interesting. So CIF ontology. And this is crystallography domain ontology. So this is interesting for me because I have a background in chemistry. I always thought crystallography was quite interesting. So let's see what we can find out about CIF ontology. First, we've got a link to the ontology file. So this is good. It appears to be pointing to a file on GitHub, which means that this is sort of curated in an open way, though I don't think people curate Turtle directly. So maybe we'll try going to this repository and seeing what's in it. So it's got similar information from what we saw before. Accepted under development. I'm not sure who it's accepted by. This repository contains both ontologies under ontology and dict to owl generator. So it's not obvious how this is curated from here, but maybe we want to point to the owl file that they're generating. So we've got some turtle files. but they said that they've got some OWL. Okay, it doesn't appear that it's inside this somewhere, so I'm not sure where they're pointing to the OWL files. But anyway, that doesn't mean that we can't add it to the bioregistry and add that information later. So let's go back and take a look at this turtle file and see what they're doing. So it appears that there's sort of this CIF core identifier space. This seems like it's part of something else and not actually. Oh, okay. So sorry, CIF is actually the name of this ontology, but maybe they're using multiple different identifier spaces, which is a little bit of a problem. It's making things more complicated. So hopefully we're not seeing that too much. And also this seems to be like a relatively short ontology. So, you know, that sometimes is a reason why you might want to skip including it in the bioregistry, because it's like a very small purpose, and maybe it's better to consider it as like an enumeration. This is actually the case for a lot of things in the fire and like the medical domain, where they have like short enumerations of lists of like 5 or 6 terms that might be useful for certain things, but they don't really constitute as their own prefix and need their own identifier space within the bioregistry. So this might be one of those cases. Yeah. This also seems to have, you know, transparent identifiers, which have lots of problems associated with them. If, for example, if you want to change the name of this, like underscore alias dot definition underscore ID, this is super difficult to, you know, think about. You'd have to change all of the artifacts that use this ontology if you wanted to make a change to one of these things. It's better to just use opaque identifiers, like just numbers or hashes of the stuff. All right, so I'm not super excited about this after looking at it, so I think we're gonna save this for later and maybe take a look at it a little bit slower, not in a video. So let's just kind of keep going. CF ontology's out for now. Let's check out Dolce, the descriptive ontology for linguistic and cognitive engineering. So it has a link to an ontology file that obviously doesn't point to an ontology file, so 404. So this one's out immediately, right? There's no point in including information about these kinds of things that they're broken and don't have any way to look at them. Okay, so the next one is EMMO. This was somewhat of like an upper level ontology that seemed to also be part of this CIF project. So we might have sort of the same thing going on here when we look at the EMMO ontology file. So elemental multi-perspective material ontology. Let's look at some of the information. So it doesn't appear to have anything going on inside it. So this one's out already just because it seems to not have any information in it. It doesn't really do anything. Moving on. So I don't want to go into these ISO standards. I think that those are sort of a little bit difficult to think about. These actually themselves aren't really ontologies. So let's kind of move on. So here's one, OntoCape, ontology for computer-aided process engineering. So this sounds like really interesting. It's kind of out of the typical scope of bioregistry, but for sure would be interesting to add. So it comes from RWTH Aachen, which is like down the street from where I live right now. Not really down the street. It's like a couple cities away, but it's close. Okay, so OntoCape is a large-scale ontology for the domain of computer-aided process engineering. So this is a lot of text. I'm going to skip all this text. What I really want to see is like, where is it? What is it? We've got domain ontology. So I guess I can download something in a zip file. So this is already boding pretty bad. This is not how you want to share things. Okay, inside this zip file appears to be an OWL file. So let's try loading this up. Would you like to attempt to resolve? No. All right, so this is from 2009. So like the outlook on something that's from 2009 is already pretty bad. It's, you know, edited in a way such that there's a file URL inside it. So this is bad as well. But anyway, it might be the case that there's some interesting things going on in here. So we've got some really high level stuff. Okay, so here's some proper chemistry. So okay, and there's also quite a bit of like ontologization going on inside here, and it seems to have its own like set of relationships. Yeah, so this is like an interesting possibility, and I'm based on the way that it's constructed, I feel like sort of from a subjective perspective that this isn't done in a modern way, and that people aren't going to be super apt to integrate it into their own sources without like a major overhaul on it. And so like I don't think it's a good idea to include this into the bioregistry because I don't know if anybody's using it. And so this is sort of another thing that we want to do with the bioregistry, is make sure that it doesn't get polluted with like a huge number of ontologies that just seem kind of to be like irrelevant and not used by anybody. So this is one of the reasons why the bioregistry automatically syncs everything from the OBO Foundry, but it does not automatically sync everything from BioPortal, because there's sort of a need in the OBO Foundry to show that it's useful and it has been reused. Like one of its principles is to check that ontologies are used by the community, whereas BioPortal is a place where you can kind of dump anything, and this also like is reflected in the average quality of the content there. So okay, without getting into like too much of a rant, I think this has already been kind of a long video, maybe listening to me rambling through some of my thought process and how I add things to the bioregistry. There's still a couple things left in this list. I think I kind of want to do those on my own time, and I'll link in the description of this video to the pull requests that I made, and you can see which ones of them made the cut and which ones didn't. So yeah, let me know if there's any interest in adding more chemistry ontologies, or if you've got some different perspectives on some of the choices that I made about adding or not adding some of these ontologies. You can always go into the issue tracker in the bioregistry and start a discussion about this kind of thing. You can directly request to add an ontology through the issue tracker instead of going through this JSON process like I just did, where I edited the file by hand. And then you can also like make some requests just to have a discussion about should we be adding these kinds of things, and like maybe there's some reasons for and against, and the community has a chance to sort of weigh in. And so like an example of that is, so here's the bioregistry GitHub page, and the issue tracker has all sorts of things going on. So there's people talking about data that's correct or incorrect inside the bioregistry, some people talking about like stuff we want to add to the bioregistry, discussions about the policy and the curation practices, and then also like information about different kinds of alignment and code and other things that aren't manually curated. So I think this is a good place to stop. Thanks for listening, and please get in touch on this issue tracker and say hello.